So welcome everybody. Welcome to our three panelists here. I'll be introducing shortly. Welcome to all of our attendees who from what I can see are around the world. And of course, you also may be watching this recording. And whether you're live or watching the recording, you're very, very welcome. And we're absolutely thrilled to have you with us. We're thrilled for your interest in the conversation around inclusion and in this specific webinar, looking at the human rights approach. My name is Aisling Clardy. I work at the UNESCO Chair in Inclusive Physical Education, Sport, Recreation and Fitness at the Munster Technological University in Ireland. And at the UNESCO Chair, we're bringing this webinar series to you in collaboration on behalf of UNESCO ICM, which is the International Centre of Martial Arts for Youth Development and Engagement in South Korea. So today, this is a seventh webinar in a series. So we have 10 webinars altogether. And so we're absolutely thrilled. We've had a range of topics so far. And as I said, the topic today is really looking at the global movement in the sports sector and looking at human rights and sustainable development and the role each of us can play and each of you can play as martial arts instructors and coaches, no matter what your martial art is, in supporting this movement. So we have three panelists today. And so I'll introduce each of them briefly and give them a few moments to share a little bit more about their own expertise. So first of all, I'm going by in order of how I see you on my screen. So first of all, my colleague Gerard Masdeu Yelamos, who also works at the UNESCO Chair with me. Gerard is doing his PhD in sport policy and human rights in and through sport. So Gerard, would you like to share with us a little bit more about yourself, please?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. And thank you, Aisling, for the introduction. So yeah, my name is Gerard. I'm originally from Barcelona. Working at the UNESCO Chair at the Munster Technological University for the last over 5 years. And I have a bachelor degree in sports sciences and another one on psychology, master's by research, and doing my PhD currently in the field of sport policy, basically trying to advance inclusion and human rights in and through sport, and doing like a case study in collaboration with Mauritius, the Republic of Mauritius, and doing some research out there. As part of my job at the UNESCO Chair as a researcher, we work with different projects at European and international level. And at different levels as well, from the policy development, but also as well from grassroots and capacity building. And I think that later on during the webinar, we will show you like a few examples of capacity building tools that we have developed in the last months, and that they are freely available for you. So keep with us, stay with us, and you'll hear more about this.
Thank you so much, Gerard. And it's nice, because I also work at the UNESCO Chair, and I haven't said a whole lot about the work that we do because we've been focusing on the inclusive martial arts. So you'll have a bit more of an idea and a flavor for all that work that we're doing. And so next is my other colleague, Sarah Carney. Sarah has a strong background in the human rights component, and that's her whole area of expertise and education. So Sarah, will you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Sure, thanks very much, Aisling, and hi everyone attending. It's lovely to be here this afternoon. So my name is Sarah, and I'm a colleague of Aisling and Gerard's in the UNESCO Chair. As Aisling mentioned, my background is human rights, so that's my academic background is in human rights, and then I've also worked in some NGOs and at the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and with the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs as a human rights officer. So about just almost 3 years ago now, I started working with the UNESCO Chair, and my role is focusing on bringing the language and the world of human rights to the sports sector and kind of trying to bring these two sectors closely together and for cooperation and how they can contribute towards each other and make them accessible to each other. As Gerard mentioned, we do work at all different levels in this regard. So some grassroots training of rights holders to advocate for their own rights to sport, and also working with policymakers to really help them understand sport as a human rights and human rights in and through sport, which is what we'll be looking at today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And, you know, from my perspective, I really see how you both have done a great job at bringing human rights to the point, from something that can seem like something that's in some institutional office sitting on a dusty shelf of these books of human rights, to something that's really social, just really socializing the human rights component. So thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing a little bit more shortly. And last but definitely not least, we have Dr. Zibin from the University of Tennessee. So he's a professor in anthropology and with a background in cross-cultural and mental health. And he's also the founder of Wheelchair Tai Chi. So Dr. Groh, will you tell us a little bit more about in a few minutes, summarize a lot of the work and your whole expertise and background there, please?
Thank you, Ashley. It's great to be here and to talk with everybody who are interested in how, empowering everybody through the sports. And yes, I am a medical anthropologist, but also I am a martial artist. And I grew up as a martial artist and had a dream to become the greatest star of martial arts. But, later on, and when I was 16, 17, I got a pretty severe injury in my back. So, and I no longer able to do those fancy, fancy kicks, jumping, those kind of martial arts everybody knew of. But then I quickly realized that, I need to do something else. And I was introduced to Tai Chi, which is internal martial arts. And so my journey started there, and it's really, really great. And the story that inspired me. And then I came to America, began to study anthropology and medical anthropology in particular. So I began interested in the whole idea of human suffering and how human suffering oftentimes is caused by perceptions and social injustice, stratifications. And also I began interested in how those stratifications and criteria of classified people are so socially constructed that then, based on any kind of merit, but yet those kind of classifications tend to have tremendous impact on the quality of life of people who are being classified a certain degree. So I began to fascinated into the study of how and the normalization, for example, how we're able to create a strategy that promote a sense of empowerment through and transforming the perceptions. And so that has been my work. And 2006, I developed the wheelchair Tai Chi based on the idea to make a wheelchair become something else rather than the assistant devices. So that program was very successful and was premiered during the 2008 Paralympics. And I just put a little link on the chat box I will send to everybody, and you can, look at it. And then during the recent years and past 12 years, been working with USVA and to use that program, the idea of Tai Chi yielding, redirecting martial arts, and for people with ambulatory disability and also PTSD, and to how to promote a sense of well-being through empowering the perceptions about their own life. So, and that has been funded by USVA for 7 years now. So, and I'm very excited to share some of the story with you later on, and if you're interested. And of course, I'm always open for any kind of question, discussions, and later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Groh. We're absolutely thrilled to have you with us. And for anybody who's watching this recording, so that link that Dr. Groh shared in the chat, where you'll find at the very end on this, there'll be a slide, a closing slide. And for anyone who doesn't know, the VA is the Veterans Affairs, isn't that right? For people who have been in the military. Thank you very much. And I'm so happy to have you here as well, because the Tai Chi as well, we're doing our best to have as much of a broad range of martial arts represented. So I'm really, really thrilled to have you here for many different reasons.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So thank you so much. And so let's dive right into the conversation.
Can you see my screen? Full screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, so in the next few minutes, we'll try to give you an overview of the global development, policy development that there has been in the last few years. So there is an agenda, a global agenda, that puts inclusion and sustainable development at the heart of the development, not only of sport, but of all sort of disciplines. We will give you an overview of the Sustainable Development Goals. You might have heard of these. These are the SDGs. So this is a UN agenda that was launched in 2015, where all nations came together and they agreed on a set of principles that they would lead, and they would be kind of like a blueprint for development, to say like, what is our vision in 2030? What do we want to see the world looks like in 2030? So they came up with 17 goals and a set of 169 detailed like indicators and targets that would help nations, but also like civil society and private sector to have like an agenda blueprint to lead action to transform like the world in where we're living. The SDGs, the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, has 3 pillars. So it's based on economic, social, and ecological development. And it looks through all this global and holistic approach. What is different from these 17 SDGs? And we will see the 17 SDGs later on. But what is different is that these apply to every nation. So these apply to everyone. So they are relevant no matter what, where you're living, and no matter as well which sort of job you're doing, because every sector is included, and this includes as well sport and obviously martial arts. So government, cities, businesses, schools, individuals, they are all called to act. They are all asked to take part of this, to embed all these principles, the 17 SDGs, in their work. Another important thing about the SDGs is the integration. So it is recognized that all the goals are interconnected, that we all live like in a system, that it's interconnected and we are interdependent. So in order to achieve one goal, we need to advance and contribute like to the achievement of all the other goals. So this is what we call the integration. And then the third point is the transformation. So in order to achieve these goals, obviously we cannot do like what we have been doing so far, because we've seen that in the last few years, the planet, there is a growing inequalities at the ecological level. We have like climate change issues and things going on. So we need to change the way that we are doing, and we need to transform and do things differently. So these 17 goals are as well a challenge for all of us that we need to address. At the core of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, there is the principle of leaving no one behind. And that's very important because it sets at the core of the agenda the inclusion principles. So we need to start with the most vulnerable, the ones who are facing more discrimination, in order to reduce like all the differences that are between individuals, between countries, and that this notion of leaving no one behind should be in the back of our minds, regardless what we're doing. We should always have these inclusion principles in our mindset. And this is what we have been trying to do as well, and to distill through all these webinars, so that inclusion is something important, relevant, and that needs to be addressed. The Agenda 2030, as I said, it identifies 17 goals, and none of these 17 goals is related to a sport. However, in the introduction of the Agenda 2030, there is one paragraph that acknowledges the paper or the role of a sport as a contributor to all these goals, as a contributor for instance, like to reduce, to empower women, to educate, to have like quality education, to reduce discrimination, to advance inclusive societies. And from all these 17 goals that you can see now on the slide, sport has been identified to be like a direct contributor to 10 of them, the ones that you can see in color. So to reduce poverty, to promote good health and well-being, to establish like quality education, to reduce gender, well, to promote gender equality, to advance and promote decent work and economic growth, reduce inequalities, and so on. So sport has a role to play, and martial arts obviously as well can contribute to this. And this is what the main point that we would like to highlight and reinforce in these few minutes that we have. There is lots of information out there on the SDGs, and there has been collective actions, and many organizations at different levels, international, regional, and local level, are using the SDGs to take action. And the sports sector has responded to this. So we have seen from like the development, and this is like a picture that goes like on a chronological way, how since the inception of the Universal Human Rights Declaration in 1948, the human rights path and the sport path, they were running always like in parallel. So there was no interaction between the two domains or two different sectors. We have seen then that since the UNESCO International Charter on Physical Education and Sport, these two paths, they started to converge and they were getting closer, and there was some reference on human rights in the UNESCO Charter on Physical Education and Sport. However, it has been now in 2015, in the last few years, where these two notions of human rights, like access to human rights as well as the contribution that the sport has to fulfill human rights of people everywhere, that they have been a stronger, and there is like a stronger link. And this has come through the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. And that's why it is so relevant. And starting this from this starting point from the Sustainable Development Goals, emerge different policies, policy documents, such as the Kazan Action Plan that was launched by UNESCO, or the Global Action Plan on Physical Activity launched by the World Health Organization, and they are all underpinned by the SDGs. And it is a matter as well to operationalize, to bring from the abstract towards something more a practical approach. These are examples of policies that are available out there and that they are relevant for everyone working in the sports sector. There is an alignment and an intersection, and obviously like the SDGs, the human rights agenda, and many other policies intersect in different ways. And I think this is something that needs to be taken into consideration, that while we are doing a work like maybe like just in a small dojo, the impact that you are doing in your local community has also a relevance at the global level. So what you might be doing at the local level might be aligned with all these policies that you have here. And it's important to be conscious of this as well, because you are contributing to the advancement of the different policy documents, which sometimes are only seen as papers that they don't have any relevance, but they can have an impact at the grassroots level. So I would encourage you as well to read like about the SDGs, to read about the Kazan action plan and all the different policies, because these can like spark some innovation, and also they might make you realize that you are doing things that are aligned to what it's described in all the different documents. So just to sum it up, and I'll give Sarah some time to talk about the human rights approach. The Kazan follow-up action plans 1 and 2, like the one is on elaborating arguments for advocacy on the importance and relevance of sport. And action 2 is on the development of indicators for the sports sector aligned to the SDGs. We are working on the development on this, and the UNESCO Chair has been doing some work on this. There we have a website where I can share the link as well, where you can see example of reporting tools that can be used to increase, to advocate on human rights treaties. And Sarah will give you more details probably on this. The notion that sport, human rights, and SDGs are inseparable, that's also very important. So when we are talking about sport, human rights should be a core part of it. So the participation at all different levels, from athletes to coaches, management, and participation, and not participation, how is it? Well, at all different levels, they should be taken into consideration. We will see as well later as well on the human rights indicators and the SDG, how they are aligned. So working on a monitoring framework that considers the SDGs, you are also advancing human rights. And as we have seen in the previous slide, there is a policy coherence, and we want that people are aware of this, of the advancements that have been done in the last few years, and how now it's the time to take action and to transform reality. So it's up to all of us to start like doing projects, to start doing initiatives, practices that are aligned to the SDGs and to human rights. And now I'll give the floor to Sarah, who will give you more information on the SDGs, on the human rights, sorry.
Thanks very much, Gerard, and thanks for that really interesting walkthrough of all the policy developments we've been seeing over the recent years. So I'm sure you've all heard a few times already today the expression human rights in and through sport. And you might be wondering, what exactly do we mean by that? So this phrase captures three separate but very closely interlinked ideas, which is, first of all, sport is a human right. Everybody has the right to participate in sport. So when we say something is a human right, we mean it's something that everybody is entitled to simply because they're a human. There's no distinction based on race, gender, disability, anything. Everyone is entitled to this. So everyone has the right to participate in sport. The second idea is human rights in sport. So that's the idea that sport should be conducted in a way that respects human rights. People should be safe, they should be included, they should be treated equally while they participate in sport. And finally, we have the idea of human rights through sport, which is the idea that sport isn't just a human right in itself, but it can also promote other rights. So it can contribute towards health, towards education, towards the right to inclusion. And so they're very closely linked and mutually reinforcing, sport and human rights. If we go to the next slide, we can see, well, where do we find human rights? What makes sport a human right? So under international law, there's 4 UN treaties that recognize explicitly the right to participate in sport. And they are the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So firstly, we look at CEDAW, which recognizes in both the article on the right to education that women and men should be treated equally in education, which includes participating in sport and PE. And also women and men have equal rights to participate in recreational activities, which include sport and all aspects of cultural life. In the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, we see in Article 30.5 that people with disabilities have the right to participate in leisure and sporting activities on an equal basis with everyone else. The Convention on the Rights of the Child recognizes that children have the right to rest, leisure, and to play and engage in recreational activities. And finally, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights recognizes that everyone has an equal right to participate in culture, which includes sport. So that's sport as a human right. But as we mentioned, there's also human rights in and through sport, which is linked to a whole range of rights. And as you can see from this list, they quite closely mirror some of the SDGs that Gerard has already highlighted. So we can see there's the right to health, which also mirrors Sustainable Development Goal 3 on promoting good health and well-being. We have the right to education, and we have an SDG on quality education. So there's significant overlap between the human rights implementation and SDG implementation. So we can see sport contributes to or requires implementation of health, education, employment, freedom from violence and exploitation, accessibility, non-discrimination, and independent living. So when we talk about human rights, who's responsible? Often when we talk about human rights, we'll talk about duty bearers and rights holders. So rights holders is in essence everybody. We all hold human rights as individuals, and we all have the right to have our rights respected and protected. However, whose job is it to make sure this happens? Ultimately, it's the state, your country, your government is called a duty bearer. It's their duty to ensure that all human rights are protected and respected in their countries. And when the human rights aren't protected or respected, that there is access to some form of remedy. You're able to complain and there's redress. However, most of us don't talk to our governments on a day-to-day basis. We don't interact with them every day. So some services the duty is passed on to people in more local areas. So a school holds duties towards its students. A hospital doctors have duties towards their patients. So whenever someone is in a position of power or authority or providing a service, they take on a human rights duty to those they are interacting with. And so they can be called duty bearers while they perform that role. So what does this have to do with sport and martial arts? Well, as you can see in the next slide, there are duty bearers in martial arts and rights holders. So the participants, the people coming to the training sessions, participating in competitions, they are the rights holders. Also people, spectators can be rights holders as they attend competitions as well. But then there's different levels of duty bearers as we look at martial arts. So you have different responsibilities if you're a governing body or a club or an organization, and then the coaches will have different responsibilities. So at the organizational level, there'll be duties to put policies in place to make sure rights are protected and respected. So this can include developing safeguarding policies for children, but also for vulnerable adults, to look at inclusion and non-discrimination policies, to look at equality policies. How are we going to make sure everyone can participate in our club, in our organization equally? And it can be something like developing a human rights plan, which is where a club or a governing body could set out what is our commitment to human rights? What policies have we already got in place? So what safeguarding inclusion policies do we already have in place? what policies do we need to put in place and we commit to putting in place, and what remedy measures do we have in place? Can someone report safely if they have any issues in our organization, in our club? Do we make a commitment to ensure they'll be safe and respected if they have to report anything? So this happens at an organizational level. And then on the other hand, we have coaches who during their sessions have duties as well. So it's these duties, hopefully they'll be implementing policies that already exist at an organizational level, and they'll have the support from the organization to fulfill their duties. So they'll be implementing the safeguarding policies, implementing inclusion policies. But even when the organization or the club is at an early stage in their human rights implementation, the coaches can still have duties to ensure their language is inclusive, their training methods are inclusive, that they're creating a safe and welcoming environment for all participants. And so what's similar to all of this, to all duty bearers can do, is adopt what we've called a human rights-based approach. And you'll have heard that in the title for today's session and mentioned a few times already. So, and this is something that we in the UNESCO Chair and elsewhere are looking at, encouraging people across sports and across all areas of sport to adopt a human rights-based approach. So what is a human rights-based approach? A human rights-based approach it's a way of looking at something and asking a number of questions and saying, okay, what human rights issues are at play here? Who is affected by what we're doing here? Are their rights being upheld? Are there dangers to their rights or the things we need to look out for? How can we further develop this activity or this program or whatever it is in such a way that we will promote and protect the rights of everyone involved? So under a human rights-based approach, all programs should work towards the realization of human rights, not against, and ideally not neutrally either. We want to be progressively working towards human rights. So human rights standards and principles will guide phases when you're developing your programs and activities. And activities will contribute to the development of capacities of duty bearers to be able to meet these obligations, and will empower rights holders to claim their rights. So when we're using a human rights-based approach, we need to ask ourselves a number of questions. The answer always comes back to human rights, the rights we've looked at under these treaties. So it's why are we doing this? So why would we adopt a more inclusive program in our martial arts training? Well, because it's a human right. Everyone has the right to participate in sport. So that's why you're doing it. And it's very important to look at how you're doing it. So is it in a way that empowers the people you want to reach? So for example, if a club decides we want to work on gender equality, we want to attract more women and girls into this organization, well, are you talking to women and girls and asking them why they're not participating and what they need? Or are you deciding for them in advance and telling them? So it's a way of bringing people along through the journey, listening to their needs, respecting their needs, and doing it in a collaborative way that lets them really be part of the process. Now you ask, what is the consequences of this this action? Will it promote human rights? Will it strengthen human rights? And you can ask, what rights will it impact on as well? But also you need to consider, is there any potential negative impacts, and how you can do your best to minimize these as well. And central throughout a human rights-based approach is the idea of rights holders. So under a human rights-based approach, inclusion isn't something that's nice to do. It isn't a favor. It isn't charity. It is a human right. We're doing this because people have a human right to be here. And it changes the way the program or the activity is built, because it's built around this being a human right, and the rights holders being active participants throughout all the stages. And it can be it's a small shift, but it can be a very empowering and respectful way of doing things. So why use the human
Sarah,
language?
sorry to cut you in there. But I think we're going to have to move on to give Dr. Zibin, Dr. Groh some time to share. I'm really sorry now to cut in there. And we're probably going to go over time as well. But we can share, anybody who's part of the MARI program, you have a copy of these slides and we'll be sharing them with you. We can also maybe even try put them in a link in the YouTube chat. And I know there's some further resources there. We can pop them in the link here for the chat as well, and also have those at the end of on that closing slide. And Sarah, apologies again to cut you in there.
Sorry, I was going on too long.
No, not at all. There's so much information, and it's, there's a lot of food for thought here for people. I'm sure everybody watching here and considering, because it is very important conversation. And I think it's also, it's also a great way for instructors to maybe even harness and access funding, and really once they realize they're aligned with this broader agenda, to use it as a tool to increase their opportunities to be in their community. So thank you so much. And once again, sorry, Sarah. Now we are going to go over time. I hope that's okay with everybody who's here. We had said this session will be 45 minutes, but let's just go over time, because I really want to make sure that Dr. Groh has plenty of time. He's a lot to share with us about the work that he's been doing in terms of empowerment, and really, which very much aligns with all of this work. So whenever you're ready, Dr. Groh, come in and share. You're unmuted, by the way.
Okay, I'm sorry. And Gerard and Sarah provide an excellent introduction to the rule of sports and to the improvement of human rights in a world context. I learned a great deal, by the way, and it's really, really neat to hear all those specific programs and the rationalities and steps that we can take. And also make me feel more, feel honored to be part of the panel. And so I'd like to kind of give from a different angle and, collaborate with the Gerard and Sarah's presentation about the way of how, why, and able to make sports become part of the tool to improving human rights. And I'm a medical anthropologist and also the cultural anthropologist. So from a cultural anthropology perspective, that perceptions oftentimes are a powerful way to create a reality. And so perceptions oftentimes not only create reality, but also create sense of treatment, right? Social injustice and the discriminations and lack of human rights oftentimes are created by the various social and cultural and ideas about people in different groups. So disability and ability is another way, and we use to define the people. So those people who are oftentimes classified by the label of inability oftentimes feel they are less valued, right? And so therefore, they tend to not only engage in what I call it social discrimination, but also social alienations. So such of long-term chronic treatment of life, and of course, obviously, and tend to create tremendous amount of social suffering. And so, but the question is this: what is disability? What is ability? Who is able, who is unable? So this is a story of behind the efforts to promote the wheelchair Tai Chi. Let me share with a story. The people often ask me, says, Dr. Groh, you are not in a wheelchair. Why you come up the wheelchair Tai Chi program? So I will tell them, which is true story, that a long time ago, and when I was a graduate student, and I was, attending classes and also teaching Tai Chi at the side. So one day I got a call, and from a gentleman, his name is Paul. He says that, oh, I have read so much of philosophies in the world, I was always fascinated with the Eastern philosophy. I read all those classics, the Art of War, Dao De Jing, and Yin and Yang, all those great ideas, and also are always fascinated with the practice of Tai Chi. I want to learn so bad, but never had opportunity. So now I heard you're in town. Would you offer me a private lesson? I said, of course, no problem. And so he said, great. And he was a freelance writer, work off his own basement, home basement. He said, just come to my home. I leave the door open, the basement door on the right side of the door, get in and just open the door, give me hell, I will come up. Simple as that. We said, great. So we decided to start the class next week. So just about I was hanging up the phone, he says, oh, by the way, I'm a blind. I said, what? And that, because it's so spontaneous, I never thought the person I've been communicating, he wants to learn Tai Chi so bad, who is a blind guy. I never taught anybody who is blind, Tai Chi or martial arts, or I never seen in real life, right? A blind person could do Tai Chi. So he caught my surprise. He says, I hope you don't have problem teaching people with disabilities. Of course, I know he was pulling my legs. I said, oh, no. I'll be honest, I never had experiences of teaching people who cannot see. He said, no problem. And I'm very patient and just, talk to me, have a conversation. I'm a good listener. I said, okay, it's just one-on-one classes. There will be no exam. So, it will be fun to see what happens. So anyway, the day I got his house, opened the door and found the basement door, open it. Of course, the basement always, like downstairs. And was pitch black. I looked around. There are a lot of switches. I don't know which one was a light switch. So I said, hey, Paul, I'm Zibin. Where is the light switch? So I thought, now I know he is blind. I rather going downstairs to meet him there rather than have him to walk up. So he replied from downstairs. He says, why do we need LIFO? I mean, that moment, I was early 20s. I thought I can do anything, right? I can fly. I can, I never associate myself with a category of disability. But that moment, I was enlightened. My goodness, he just gave me a lesson. He doesn't need lights walking around his basement because he know it, this place. But I do need lights. So the classes we went, unfortunately, did not last too long, about 2 or 3 months. And he fell many times because I don't know. I didn't know how to teach him. I teach a blind person doing Tai Chi. And Tai Chi was created for normal people, right? You need the legs, you need, all kind of mobility in order to practice this. So that was very sad, but I learned so much from him. So that was a moment I began to ask my question. I've taught so many people Tai Chi, but so many people, they learn Tai Chi just because they feel it's something interesting. They didn't have intrinsic motivation. They quit. But this person, he loved the idea Tai Chi. He never seen Tai Chi before, but he visualized, he wants to learn. He wants to make it become part of his life. but I couldn't do it. I couldn't help him. So that was the beginning, the journey for me to find out a way to study, really understand the emotional, psychological distress of people who are being labeled as disability. All people have disabilities. So, and one day I think 1988, I was watching the Winter Olympics and beautiful ice skatings, you know, people skates, dancing on ice beautifully with the music. Suddenly it dawned to me, what if those people do not have skates? They just like walking with normal shoes. Could they do it? They cannot do it, right? We know that. Snow skill, downhill skill, they are graceful, beautiful because there are assistant devices. So why one assistant device actually play a role of empowering the participants or users, or another assistant devices somehow stigmatize the user. So that is a social construction of disability. So we all have disability, everybody have disabilities, but the way we decide to choose certain disability as a disability, right? Certain disability as normalized. For example, many of us wear glasses. I always use the example because without glasses, a lot of people cannot see nothing. But glasses no longer represents the image of disability. So as an anthropologist, I feel the power of a culture, the power of perception. So the way to promote the empowerment of people with disability is to develop programs that provide the platform that enable the individual with disability feel they are equally have the power, have the space, have the abilities. So wheelchair Tai Chi or martial arts in that way really play a very important role because martial arts represents the traditional and the long tradition of a human struggle with nature. It's about idea of overcome. So many people with disability oftentimes feel the lack of the ability to overcome, right? But Tai Chi is also an internal martial arts. It's a way of how you able to transforming a negative energy into positive within very, very limited space because Tai Chi is circular. So that is the one I began to think that Tai Chi would be perfect way to promote not just the physical well-being, but most importantly, the mental empowerment. So to make a wheelchair become the part of Tai Chi movement, to use that kind of gentle, circular, even small because of physical ability, to create a circle. The circle is a circle, regardless small or big. They provide exactly some function to engage in sense of a flow, sense of yield, redirect. So based on those rationalities, and I developed the wheelchair Tai Chi. And as you can see from the little YouTube clip, it's a really kind of changes the perceptions about the wheelchair. And this program, like I mentioned earlier, has been also applied to veterans with PTSD. And the people with a stressful mental state, oftentimes their space are limited. oftentimes feel they have nowhere to go, or people be discriminated, right? The common words is that there is nowhere to go. They can do nothing about it. But Taiji, through that kind of flow, bodily narrative, or embody that kind of a powerful perceptions to create a sense of transformation. That yes, I can move around, I can yield, redirect, I can move like water. So that is the kind of maybe serve as an example and to demonstrate how sports can be played, role of sports can be played in fulfill our common goal, which is the achieve the human rights and human and whatever we are, whatever the physical conditions, and we'll have equal quality of life.
Thank you, Dr. Guo, for your lovely presentation. And I really appreciate you sharing your journey of when you first worked with that first person who had the visual impairment, and your humility in acknowledging that you didn't know what to do. And because sometimes it is a lot of people, and even some of our other panelists as well, sometimes it's just something you kind of fall into, and you have to find your way. But actually there are lots of resources that are available online. I know Sarah and Gerard have some in terms of the human rights approach, but also UNESCO ICM also have a free online course for anybody, for martial arts coaches and instructors, that you can learn some tips and tools and strategies on how to, for example, include somebody who has a visual impairment, because rather, just to give you that little bit of a leg up as you go. And I really love, Sarah, what you're saying as well about, that human rights approach is really putting the person you're working, or the group that you're working to include, putting them at the center, including them in the decision making as well. It's a very, very important point. I feel like we could have scheduled this webinar to be a lot longer, and yeah. I think we could have had a lot of rich discussion. And so, as I said to each of you in the chat, I'll share with you the slides on the human rights conversation, and there are some of those links that are in the chat also, which will also be on that closing slide if you're watching this recording. And I don't know if we were to each of our panelists to come around and share. We're coming to the close of time, but before we close this session, maybe if any of you have some closing remarks, or any one piece, if you could say in 1 or 2 sentences, one bit of advice for any of our viewers or attendees in terms of what it is that the human rights approach, maybe Sarah and Gerard, or the SDGs, and Dr. Groh, maybe something advice for anybody who might be aspiring to be more inclusive. So Gerard, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I would like to take the chance as well to answer here one question we had on the chat that was asking on the impact that COVID had on the policies, on the sport policies. And I think this is, and I'll share now one article that I wrote recently on the lessons learned from COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that the key point of this is that we are back at the starting point of the key principles of the SDGs and human rights. So COVID-19 is reinforcing even more and strengthening all these principles, and making inclusion a key thing to consider as part of this recovery process. So I think that's only like I think it's unfortunate that we had all this global pandemic, but this is even reinforcing like all the work that we have been doing in the last years, that is highlighting the SDGs, inclusion, and a human rights-based approach. And I think that this is the way that we have to follow, and we need to pursue in the next years to see like some advancement and transformation at different levels.
Thank you, Gerard. Thank you very much. And Sarah, any wise words from you?
Thanks very much. And thank you for sharing your experiences, Dr. Guo. It was really, really interesting to hear. I think just to kind of sum up, I know I gave everyone a lot of information this afternoon, but I think the key takeaway is not to be intimidated by the human rights and the SDGs and the policy, to understand it's a few underlying principles, like you were saying, Aisling, this putting the person in the center. Don't get bogged down on, oh, the language in this treaty or this covenant or this convention. Just think about the key principles, the key idea of respect and the dignity of the people you're working with, and to give it a try. Don't get put off. And as Gerard said, we're developing resources to help you in this journey. But I hope you to give it a try, get engaged with the approach, and don't be put off by the UN language or this language, or don't worry so much about that, and just give it a try.
Thank you, Sarah. And I think for people even to acknowledge inside of that, it might seem a little intimidating or maybe even overwhelming at the beginning, but I think if you were to really look at your practice, you're probably already adopting the approach in many ways already. Just to acknowledge it and maybe make some adaptations or expansion in how you operate and think about your processes. Thank you very much, Sarah. So, and Dr. Guo, last but absolutely not least.
Well, thank you all for your wonderful presentation, and I really enjoyed it. And I don't have any wise words to say, but I can borrow some other people's wisdom. Human is part of nature, and human should act like nature, and which is that indiscriminative, and every part of human, every kind of human, every part of nature reality, and not only sustain a human life, but also is part of human life. So therefore, and discriminations or in social injustice itself is not adaptive practices. And so, like I said, disability ability is more of the culturally or socially relevant than biologically or naturally. So therefore, and to promote human rights is not just luxury, it's not just a policy, rather than it's our human rights. And thank you.
Thank you. What a lovely way to wrap up the conversation, because we're all human, we're all on this planet, we all have the equal rights, we all, we really are in it together. So thank you so much. And so just to wrap up, to let you know, so there are a few more sessions in the webinar series. Our next session is a question and answer session, and it's next Tuesday. And we have some great panelists from one of our from some of the previous webinars. We have D'Artagnan Crockett, the judoka and Paralympic medalist. We have Michael Sirota from the World Para Taekwondo Instructors Association, Louise O'Byrne, martial artist and blogger, who's done a lot on work on inclusion of women and girls. We have Dushana Augustovichova, which I may have pronounced her name a little bit incorrectly, but so she's the chairwoman of the Para Karate Commission and the World Karate Federation, and also Simon Dodd, an inclusive award-winning manager of an inclusive award-winning club in Wales. So that's our next Q&A session. So if you can't make it live, it's on Tuesday, August 10th from 4 to 5 p.m. Universal Time. And if you can't make the session, if you're here, maybe you can submit some questions to me. You can reply to this, the link in this webinar, and send some questions. And of course, we would love to see you live. And if there are any questions that we haven't had a chance to address, we'll also bring those questions forward as well. And of course, like all of the webinars, that will also, if you can't attend live, it will be on our YouTube channel. And so I'll pop a couple of links into the chat just before we go. And I also, and before I do that, I wish to offer our deepest gratitude to each of our panelists, Gerard, Sarah, and Dr. Groh, each of our attendees. All of you, we're so happy that you're joining us and that you've been engaging, for all your comments and questions in the chat. And of course, to Daeong Lee and all of her colleagues at UNESCO ICM for the opportunity to create this webinar series. And so in the chat here, I'm just about to pop in. So we have I'll put in the schedule also for the remainder of the series, because we've also actually, there will be a third Q&A session, which will also be open to the public now. And I'll also put in my email address just in case if you wish to submit any questions and if you can't make it. And so it's been an absolute joy, a pleasure to be with you all. Thank you, everybody, from the bottom of my heart to all of you. See you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
I'll stay on a moment just in case anyone needs to access the chat. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. See you.